I'm not pulling out of my driveway. We all know what that means. It's time for another drive to work, coronavirus edition. So I've been doing lots of interviews while I've been stuck at home, but I've not interviewed a lot of artists. I technically did interview Mac Avada, but here's my first artist who is just an artist and doesn't do other stuff, is an artist. So Mark Tedin is with us. So welcome, Mark Tedin.
Or afternoon.
Good afternoon. Okay, so I wanted to start from the very beginning, which is, how did you first learn about magic?
Well, I first learned about magic from, it was actually Anson Maddox. I was working, I had just moved to Seattle, and we had been working on the role-playing game for Wizards of the Coast, which was Talaslanta. And it was one of the first things I was working on commercially. In fact, I had done a sketch or two for, the then art director while I was still going to school in St. Louis, or I should say after I was going to school. And I had just moved to Seattle, started doing, some work for that role-playing game. And only a couple of months later, in either November or December, did the Magic project come down the pipeline.
What year is this? What year are you talking about?
This was in 1992.
92, okay.
Yeah, November or December of 1992 was when we first got, the pitch from Jesper Myrforce.
So what did you tell me the pitch? What did Jesper tell you? What were you doing?
Well, Jesper was, of course, he's very excited about the project in general. We had done a few things for Talaslanta up until that point. And then he said, this is a pretty incredible game. And he showed me probably at that point, some prototypes using some copy paper and cartoons, just, grabbed from all over the place, like Calvin and Hobbes, some fantasy artwork. And he said, isn't this just the most incredible thing? You play against each other, and you've got these small little bits of artwork, and it's a very interactive game and very fast, very, if I can say the word, maybe twitch. Compared to role playing games, which are by their nature very slow, deliberate, but Magic the Gathering sort of requires a more fast-paced approach.
And from an art standpoint, what were you told? What did they need?
Well, at the very beginning, at least when Jesper was assigning the artwork, they were generally just one-word art descriptions, just the title of the card. Beyond the color and the basic mechanic of that card, it would just be whatever the title was implying. So there wasn't actually a lot of specific description like there is nowadays, when you can receive an entire style guide or a description that was paragraphs long. Often it was just the title. I'd receive a Sphere of Annihilation, for example, which was actually based on another property. So of course it was renamed, but it was the flavor of the idea that would just sort of spark an image, and the image was done rather relatively simply. Often it was one object with one simple background.
So are you talking about Neverall's Disc?
No, Sphere of Annihilation was renamed into Chaos Orb.
Oh, Chaos Orb, okay.
So all the sketches that I have just say Sphere of Annihilation.
Okay.
And I didn't realize it was actually another property, Sphere of Annihilation, until I was listening to Will Wheaton's reading of Ready Player One, and he casually brought up a Sphere of Annihilation in regards to, I think it was a video game of some kind. And I was going, wait, what did he say? Did he say Sphere of Annihilation? And then I realized it was from something else. The same thing went with Lord of the Pit. Was originally just nicknamed Balrog, so I gave across something that was very loosely based on Tolkien, but it wasn't the same look, but it had the same atmosphere.
So real quickly, just for the audience, so you were one of 25 original artists. So Alpha had 25 artists on it. And you did, by my count, 16 cards from Alpha.
16 cards, yes.
So Circle Protection Red, Wall of Swords, Brain Geyser, Time Twister, Lord of the Pit, Fireball, Wall of Wood, Chaos Orb, Helm of Chatswick, JMD Tome, Mana Vault, Neverall's Disc, Soul Ring, Time Vault, Winter Orb, and Wooden Sphere. So what was your favorite?
That's right.
What was your favorite of your alpha cards?
The favorite of the alpha cards, like at least early on, perhaps was Chaos Orb and Lord of the Pit. I think Lord of the Pit may have, or Helm of Chatsuk may have, either one have been like the first Magic card that I worked on. I'm not sure which one I worked on the sketch first, or which one was the one that I finished painting. Lord of the Pit was a little bit of a visual holdover from Talislanta and people are always asking about what that little symbol in the corner was, and I just tell people I don't know. It was meant to look like a chapter head of some sort of arcane book, and perhaps this is like this creature's family crest. And I had done that with a role-playing game, and it just was one of those things that carried over.
So I'm going to ask you about a few other of your cards, just because some of your cards are very, very iconic Magic cards. So Neverall's Disc. Do you remember anything about doing Neverall's Disc?
Yes, I do. And I remember getting the art descriptions, or I should just say the titles of the cards over the phone with Jesper Merfors. And he would just go down the line of all the cards, at least all the cards that hadn't been grabbed by somebody else he had talked to previously. And I would just go, oh, that sounds interesting. Check me out for that one, and we'll come back to it. And through the process of elimination, we actually settled on, a couple of cards that generally lean towards red and black, I think, early on. A lot of artifacts, just because they sounded interesting. So that was pretty much the way I had picked those early ones.
And do you remember the drawing of Neverall's Disc? Do you remember what inspired that art?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, the Neverall's Disc. He had just said the name Neverall's Disc, and I didn't know what he was talking about. He said it was something that was summoning a creature. So I had a pendant with a little creature coming out of it. When I actually saw the card printed, either someone told me or I realized that it was an anagram of Larry Niven. And Larry Niven was a science fiction author of Ringworld and all those properties. And I realized that I'd missed a little bit of an opportunity to do something that was teleportation based, because Larry Niven's discs would have probably been close to transporters in the far future. And I could have done something that could have looked like that, but it is what it is, and I was very pleased to see that Larry Niven had actually signed some of those cards themselves at conventions, and I was just thrilled. Okay,
another card, another very famous card of yours, Soul Ring. Do you remember
Yes.
the making of Soul Ring?
Yes. I'm trying to think if that one was actually named something else. I think it may just have been Soul Ring. So I was probably coming up with a good page and a half of sketches, and I wanted to come up with something that was very, very much tied to a sun itself, and not so much like a hard artifact. I think a lot of soul rings have been reinterpreted as these things you can either hold or have in front of you. But I thought an interesting idea for an artifact would just be something stellar in size. So if you've ever seen scientific images of the sun, usually there's a loop coming off of it, a prominence as they call it. And would it be interesting if that loop had disconnected and actually formed a ring and just had become its own self-sustaining magical effect? And if that could be considered an artifact, well, then all the better. I had done it with pretty fast. It was just done with probably 3 colors of watercolor. with the canvas that was, very, very damp. So I was getting all these sort of random effects in watercolor, and I was playing with it, and it was very fast, but I thought it was very effective, and the original itself was actually rather luminous looking.
How big were so people understand how big were the illustrations?
These were all 5x7, 5 inches by 7 inches approximately. There was many reasons for that. First off, being that I think it was much simpler to scan and not tile together in Photoshop. So it was a lot easier for the art director to either scan it or store it or reduce it to another size when it was being processed afterwards. So all those originals are relatively sort of small.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that the pictures are actually, a lot of them are much, much, much smaller than they think that the originals of them.
Yeah. Nowadays, I mean, there's a lot of them that have like this implied detail, but if you saw the original, you could probably spot where things are starting to break down, which is why like some of those original pieces, anytime I see them like blown up to a large size, I wince a little bit because you can see like the pencil marks. You can see like, where there is lack of detail because again, this is only 5x7. So if you've got somebody in the background with like, a hand, maybe they're missing fingers, maybe they're not. I think one example would probably be Time Twister. Time Twister, I thought like the main character's face was a little on the undetailed side, but if you're, scaled down to a card which is 1/3 the size of the original, it's not really noticeable. But if you blow it up to poster size, it's very noticeable.
So, what inspired Time Twister? That art? What got you to do that pose?
I had probably done, again, a number of sketches, and I was having a hard time thinking of how to get across the idea of time being distorted. So I just kind of fell back onto, having two characters, in a place, reacting to some sort of time twisting event. On the right, there's somebody casting the spell, probably drawing power from something that looks like a timepiece, and the effect, which is this person's armor, being aged and starting to disintegrate. So if it was a little more abstract, I think it would have been more difficult to get it across. But I wanted to sort of tell the story that someone was being adversely affected by something called a time twister.
Okay, so the one last alpha card I want to ask about, just because this is another very iconic image from you, Winter Orb. What inspired Winter Orb?
Yes, again, that was another case where I could have just had one object, in the middle. Wooden Sphere is a little bit like that. Of course, Chaos Orb is also a spherical object. I did the same with Dark Sphere as well. But I didn't want it to be as much of the focus. I wanted the effect of like the Winter Sphere, the Winter Orb, to be in the center. And so that is probably why people think that the polar bear, the poor polar bear in the middle, is the central to the story. But I just did it for compositional purposes. The Winter Orb is something that causes a lot of destruction, as the corpses of these poor polar bears. I seem to have like this thing against polar bears in the first couple of sets, but that's just by accident. So it's a bit mysterious, why this Winter Orb is so destructive. But I have done alternate, takes on the object itself, actually sort of popping claws like Wolverine, out of its side. A little bit like, a drone that has claws coming out of it as well.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to some other iconic art you've done later on. So I'm going chronologically here, but so the next piece is from Arabian Nights. So this is another super iconic piece of yours, Juzam Jin. What inspired
Juzem
Juzem Jin? Yeah.
Well, I had thought of the sketch that I had done that I sort of gravitated towards was just a simple genie that had massive horns coming out of his head. And I think that originally, because I didn't want it to look too much like Darkness from the movie Legend, that I would remove his nose. So he actually had like a little bit of a nose that resembled Voldemort's, and of course he was holding someone who had summoned him by the scruff of his neck, and he was like having a very intimidating conversation with him. By the way, that is also a card that if you focus on that little guy's hand, it just totally breaks apart. So if you scale that piece of artwork up, I would kind of go, oh no, that doesn't really work. But it's one of my favorite cards. It's people seem to think it's an early iconic image. I think one of the early video games actually had it on its cover.
Yeah, it did. Okay, next, we'll jump to Legends. Mana Drain, another very famous card that you illustrated.
Yes, Mana Drain. Was that from the Dark, or was that?
That's from Legends. It was from Legends.
Oh, that was from Legends. Okay.
Yeah, and then you also in Time Spiral you had a card that you sort of made homage to it.
Yeah, the little shrimp.
Yeah. So what inspired Mana Drain? How did you?
Well, that was another card that was going to be very difficult because early on, the idea of mana hadn't been sort of hashed out what that would look like beyond just the five colors. So instead, I tried to pull in some of the aspects of the lands to I don't know, to imply that something was pulling power from another color. So I had something that was red that was also pulling something out of something that was red, which in this case could have been an undersea mountain or volcano, hence the lava. And by the way, he's got 5 tentacles poking in, which could perhaps imply that, or at least refer to the Pente, the 5 colors.
Yeah.
I had underwater, which was, blues and greens. I guess not so much of green, but you've also got white light coming from above. So I was trying to include the colors of the mana, but the specific one kind of specific mana wasn't really there. So it's not so much about the creature, but rather what it is drawing from, or what sort of land it is drawing from.
So one of the things that's interesting for artists is how you don't know when you draw what's going to end up being the popular cards, right? Because it has a lot to do with what the card is versus what the art is. Is it? I mean, Juzem Jim, for example, you like the art a lot and went on to be a really big card. It's nice when those two overlap.
Well, I'm trying to remember. Does Juzem Jin have a particular power that made the card sort of attractive to the players? Or?
Yeah. At the time, it was a very powerful creature. We made creatures much more powerful. It's nowhere near as powerful as it once was. But in its day, it was a very powerful card. Okay, so now I want to jump ahead to Ice Age. So, by the way, you've illustrated, by my count, 189 cards. Is that close to right?
It could be. Actually, I'm not sure which ones are repeats, but I thought it was at somewhere upwards of almost or around 200. But
well, also this is only stuff that's out, so you also might have done some stuff that isn't public yet. So
right, that's true.
Okay, so next one I want to talk about is another super iconic piece of yours, Necropotence.
Necropotence, yes.
So how'd you end up? What inspired Necropotence?
Well, I remember when I received the assignment or assignments for Ice Age. It was I had done quite a few cards in some of those early sets, but Ice Age was one that that I had done at least 9, 10, 11 cards for. So besides Alpha, it was one of those sets that I had done a lot more, and part of the assignment sort of overlapped into I think a trip that many people who are working at Wizards were going to the first Toy Fair in New York City. I think it was called New York Toy Fair.
Yeah, New York Toy Fair.
Yeah, and I was really excited to go, but I had deadlines, so I had to stick to those deadlines. And I remember taking at least a batch of cards to finish, relatively fast. And I think it was Necropotence, Naked Singularity, and Nacre Talisman, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And I had to finish that in the hotel when I first arrived in New York. It was my first trip to New York City, and I was excited to get out there and go see things. But I had this deadline, so I think for a good 48 hours, I was trying to fiercely finish painting those 3 cards. So Necropotence was done as simply as I could do. It was, again, a relatively small image, 5x7. But I think I ended up doing it with watercolor, a little bit of gouache, and there's even a little bit of ballpoint pen in there.
Interesting.
You could probably see it when it's blown up, fairly large. I wouldn't recommend, doing something like that again, but I was actually pretty pleased at how the final turned out, because I was able to put specific tones and details in with a medium that was probably, I probably wouldn't do it the same way nowadays. But there was a sketch, in the sketch phase, before I'd come to New York, I was having a hard time coming up with an idea that would sort of encapsulate the idea of powerful death, which the name implies. So I ended up at first having what would be considered maybe a reverse wake. There were all these sort of Harry Potter candles floating in midair, and what looked like these zombies raising the dead from this crypt. I didn't think it sort of sold the idea well enough, fast enough. So in this case, I just put a skull with some power emanating from his hand, and I thought that sort of got the idea across a little faster, a little better.
Yeah. Also, that's another card where you got to do another version of it in Unhinged. We had Necro Impotence, and we had you. Do you like doing parodies of your own stuff? Is that fun for you, or?
Oh, I love it. Oh, that was a fun one to work on. The Unhinged and some of the unsets were fun because you get to sort of you parody your own work, because I don't take my work extremely seriously. So in that case, I just had the sense that his power was failing, and I even put a symbol on his forehead that had what was the symbol for male in Greek.
Oh, okay.
I had sort of bending down. So I didn't want to make it too offensive to people of all ages, but I thought it got across the idea of the power of death, but it was failing a little bit.
So at this point, just a little background for the audience. You and I actually worked together because you came to work for Wizards for a little while. So
yes.
let's talk about that. So you joined basically. Michael Ryan and I had pitched the Weatherlight Saga, and they put together a team, our very first world-building team, essentially. And you and Anson and I'm trying to remember everybody, but anyway, you guys came in, and you guys were off in Siberia. I think that's what we called the room. And you guys were You designed. It was for Tempest Block, right? That's the you guys sort of built the World of Wrath.
Yeah. That had started in 97. Right after Weatherlight. I don't think that Homelands was included with that concepting, but starting with Urza's Saga. I think it was Urza's Saga.
Well, Tempest was the first set. I think you guys came in and you built Wrath, which was in Tempest, and then you
that's right.
you were around
Tempest was
through
the first one.
Right, it was Tempest, and then you were there through Urza Saga block. So what was that like working at Wizards?
Well, it was like the first time that I had done, a concepting push. In this case, it was a concepting push that, had stuck around for for a few years. I had to sort of scale back the number of cards that I had done for the sets, but at the same time, I got to formalize a lot of the world building. And so I worked with Anson Mannix, my good friend, Anthony Waters, a fabulous visual designer. It came on a little bit later, but we had started with like the core group under Jesper with Matt Wilson, Anson, myself. Later, they brought on Dave and Chippy, who's Brian Dugan and Dave Alsop, for a lot of the Phyrexian designs, because they had for the first time tried to nail down what Phyrexia was, even though there were a few references before. Even my what was it, Phyrexian priest. There really wasn't a sort of a locked down vision of what machine and like flesh was supposed to look like. So they did a great job of hammering that out. Sam Wood, Matt Cavato, a little bit later, Todd Lockwood, and a few other people came on in the ensuing years at what they had originally called Spine Design, almost like a sort of a design group within Wizards of the Coast. We worked in an area called Siberia after we quickly realized that working in the cubicles with a lot of the other people was just going to be too distracting. It was good to put us in a room where we could just feed off of each other's ideas and take a look at what each of us was doing. So we put together style guides, tried to formalize what the look and feel of Magic was, at least from that point on. It's a lot more streamlined nowadays. The style guides don't ramble on as much as we probably had done early on, but we went into all the story meetings with you guys. We tried to hammer out ways of converting a storyline into visual ideas and making them recognizable, based through color, the colors of Magic, the creature types. I think earlier, the look and feel of certain creatures like goblins needed to be sort of hammered down. So there were, it was all over the place, but it was a lot of fun because the end result was that Magic had been, sort of transformed visually into something that was more amenable to a consistent storyline.
Yeah, I mean, that was the first time that we really had a consistent look and feel. Like, one of the things you guys did also is you did all the character work, right? The Weatherlight crew had a cast, and you guys did, did you design Karn? Was that your design?
Karn was my design, yeah. So when I got all the teasing for the way that I had done Karn for one of the more recent sets, I think it was Double Masters of last year, I was thinking, well, hold on, I actually did the first version of him. Maybe I brought too much of his early look into the artwork, but he was a fairly mopey character, sort of the Eeyore of the group, and so having him express any sort of emotion, I guess, was a little too shocking for some people.
Yeah. So we're almost out of time here. I'm almost to my desk, if you will. So looking back, you've done over 200 Magic cards. So earlier on, you said one of your favorites was Juzem Jin. Is that your all-time favorite illustration you've done, or is there another one that's your favorite Magic illustration?
The all-time. I'm not sure. I mean, there's a lot of them that I found it was a lot more fun to paint it. Leviathan was also a good one, just because it came out, how I'd sort of pictured it. But I don't know. Emrakul was an early favorite because it was one of the first pieces I had done that was sort of on the larger side.
How big was the illustration?
I think it was like 11 by 17 or 11 by 14.
Oh wow, that is big.
Well, at the time, like it was me scaling up the work because, like I said, I was doing all those like 5 by 7 images and probably like some 8 by 10s, but doing a larger piece was something that I hadn't really tackled before.
So one last card I like just because it's a very beautiful card and there's a lot of detail in it. The Antiquities War.
Sorry, the Antiquities War?
Yeah, it's the saga that's vertical.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Actually, I've got it here in the studio.
So how did that one come about? Because that is there's a lot in it. If you really look closely, there's a lot going on.
Yeah. The art director wanted me to sort of return back to the design sort of feel of like the Urza saga, and I was pulling. I designed Urza in some of his early accoutrements, although it has been updated. Sort of some of the updates are sort of showing up as the automaton, like at the bottom of the screen. But I got to sort of have a depiction between the two brothers, all their mechanisms that they commonly use, and also to depict the Soul Stone. I think it was the Soul Stone. Mm-hmm. Sorry, the Weak Stone and the
Might Stone. Yeah,
the Might Stone, being that first singular look. I don't think it had been depicted consistently. It always sort of varied, kind of like Sauron's ring, from something you hold in your hand to the size of a skull. Mm-hmm. So in this case, it's just them, about to pry it off, using like these different mechanisms that sort of show the style of both Urza and Mishra.
So, any final memories? I mean, you've worked like you and I. Actually, you've worked on Magic longer than I've worked on Magic because I've only worked on Magic for 25 years. What do you have any favorite memory? What did you think when you think back to your many years of working on Magic? What is your favorite memory?
Favorite memory, of course, is just meeting a lot of like the other artists who I admire tremendously. Not everybody lived in the same area, but like quite a few did. Quite a few who had gone to school at Cornish, Julie Barrow, of course, and getting to work with my best friend since childhood, Anson Maddox. When the game had just started, even before it had come out, I have a fond memory of painting on Anson's apartment floor, trying to crank out as many images as we could within the deadline given to us. You said that I had done 16 pieces for Alpha.
Yeah.
Anson had actually done 30.
Wow.
One reason was that I think there were some cancellations or changes at the last minute, and usually Jesper Merforce would give those last minute changes to Anson. Mm-hmm. And he would just knock them out of the park. And it was a very heady time, one of our first sort of commercial jobs for a role-playing game company. It was just it's been a wild ride since then, and it never fails to amaze. No, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's interesting. So according to my research here, there's only 3 artists: you, Ron Spencer, and Rob Alexander, that worked at the beginning of Magic that still now do art. And so you I mean, it's funny that you really are one of the sort of the marathon runners of Magic art that have gone the distance for a long time.
Yeah, I think that Mark Poole is also like one of those really early artists that still do some really nice work.
Oh, that is true. That is true.
I had taken sort of a break for a few years. I didn't get the call for a while, but over the past few years, doing either some reboots of old artwork redoing like the Soul Ring in a way that sort of harkened back to the original card, and doing it in a new way. It gives you like a chance to grow, and I'm very thankful for that.
Well, I want to thank you for being with us. This has been very fun, and I like the interviews showing off lots of different parts of Magic. So it's really fun to show off the art side of it, because that's a big part of the game, and you've been part of the art since the beginning. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for having me on. And everybody stay safe out there.
So guys, I'm at my desk, so we all know what that means. It means it's the end of my drive to work. So instead of talking Magic, it's time for me to be making Magic. So thank you so much, Mark, and everybody.
Again.
I'll see you all next time.